Let's try this from the top one more time. Okay. Hello, Tumblr. My name's Kalen. For those of you who come across this video and don't follow me or have uh, any awareness of me beforehand, um, I'm making this video essay today to talk about the various discourse around Ao3 versus donation posts on Tumblr, and a lot of how that's framed in the conversations that have come up lately, that come up every year when this happens, twice a year. Um, uh, and just want to try and expand people's perspective on it a little bit, based just on my own. Just want to preface this by saying I'm someone who is not at all impartial on this matter. I've been very critical of Ao3 in the past and continue to be critical on account of, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor, incest survivor, physical abuse survivor. I was raped and gay bashed in college, which left me, my lovely physical disability that I have currently, and I'm trying to, get surgery for, and I rely on donation posts to help me get there. And all of this informs my feelings on Ao3 and a lot of the content that people are so defensive about it. In addition, I'm currently going back to work flipping burgers for minimum wage because it's the only job I can get on top of the freelance work I already do that doesn't make me enough to actually have this surgery, and so I have to keep putting it off and putting it off. And so despite the fact that, I have chronic pain issues, vertigo issues, sleep half the day, and spend several hours, in the bath or the shower every day in order to deal with my physical issues, and thus I'm not in the best place to be standing on my feet flipping burgers for a minimum wage. All of that is a thing, so, I'm not, if I get heated during this, this is why. It's personal. It's not based on morality, it's not based on purity culture, it's not based on any of the stuff that people like to, raise in defense of Ao3 and its staunchest supporters. It's very much deeply personal. And I'm not trying to hide that. So the specific focus I want to start with today is on something, about something someone said to me recently when I made a comment about how, I hope that nobody who spitefully encourages people to donate to Ao3 to be like, fuck its critics or anything like that, I hope none of them ever have to rely on donation posts, in the future and get called a scam artist or something like that, because I actually sincerely do hope that, because it's not a fun time for anyone. And so this got a couple of comments of the nature that, how do we know that people who are donating, $10 to Ao3 because they benefit from the entertainment it gives and, want to invest in that? How do we know that they aren't also, spreading their money around via donation posts on Tumblr, that sort of thing? The reason this caught my attention specifically is because I think it really speaks to something that comes up a lot in all aspects of this conversation, and that is the way that people like to defend Ao3 and a lot of its content and a lot of its donations and everything with the hypothetical of expecting everyone to assume the best of its intentions and those of its supporters and content creators and everything like that, while simultaneously assuming the worst of all of its critics and, people who are just upset because, we've been out here fundraising for literal years and can't meet our goals while, Ao3 has millions in reserve and drops a donation post every twice a year and quadruples its amount within 3 days. People assume that it's just sour grapes on our part, and we don't know that people aren't also donating to donation posts and that sort of thing. But the thing is, we kind of do. From your perspective, if you've never been on this side of things, it's Schrodinger's cat. Anything could be either one way or another. Hypotheticals can go both ways. And so there's no reason for you not to assume the best of um, the intentions and um, goodwill of everyone that you happen to agree with intellectually or emotionally or that sort of thing. But when you're on the other side of things, like, it's not hypothetical for us. I know exactly who donates to me, like, and it's frequently the exact same people over and over again. Like, I can pretty much always use donations, but I hesitate to put my donation posts out there more than like a couple times a month, honestly, because routinely it's the same relatively small circle of mutuals and followers who like are completely known to me, and like I'm not trying to like drain them dry of everything while trying to stay afloat myself, you know? So like, and this is something that I've talked about a lot with various other friends who rely on donation posts, because another thing is like the second we have like even the slightest surplus, like a lot of us are donating to each other, like in the world's like most inefficient pyramid scheme ever. Like, you know, I've got a spare $10, I send it to my friend who, you know, I know has no groceries for the night, and on and on. And so like it's really frustrating to constantly get hate in our inboxes and on our posts about how, you know, we're scam artists, when like a lot of us have physical video proof of our situations or circumstances, or provide proof in every way possible when we shouldn't even have to, and none of that phases people whatsoever. And we're also keenly aware of like how finite the circle of, you know, influxes of donations actually is, and a lot of it, you know, comes from trying to keep each other afloat. And like we're asked to assume the goodwill of people who literally in their own words phrase things like, well, you've encouraged me to spite donate to AO3 now, instead of giving my money to you or anything like that. And it's just like there's a very clear dichotomy where people want to defend their own side of the equation with the hypothetical optimal takes, and yet not only are they not encouraging, you know, other people on their side of this debate to extend the same goodwill to our side of things, you know, it's additionally people go the extra mile in assuming the worst of our intentions and that sort of thing. And once I started thinking about this, the thing it kept reminding me of is how much this whole hypothetical, you know, goodwill defense versus assuming the worst of criticism, how much it extends to pretty much every single facet of the AO3 controversies or whatever. Like, for instance, like on top of what I just mentioned, there's also the fact that like pretty much any time I go into expanding on my own circumstances or talk about how various things like, you know, ableism and homophobic takes and, you know, different presentations or types of content geared around sexual abuse and rape and that sort of thing, anytime I like expand on how that affects me personally and plays into my life at all, like inevitably I get pushback and criticism and a non-hate about how I'm just milking it. I'm milking my personal tragedy, my personal trauma for sympathy, for donations, for that sort of thing. Um, I'm just trying to, you know, get people to agree with me by making them feel bad for me, that sort of thing. But then at the exact same time, notice how this sort of accusation is never leveled um, towards people who have written 50, 80, 100 different fics about different kinds of like glorified or hypersexualized or romanticized, you know, rape or sexual abuse or abusive dynamics, that sort of thing. Like nobody nobody goes to the author who has written 20 variations of the exact same, rape fic, and that is specifically couched in a way to get readers to comment in the veins of like, oh, this is so hot, this is so sexy, as opposed to like, oh my god, like how fucked up. Like nobody's going to like that author and being like, oh, you're milking the fuck out of this specific scenario. You see what I'm saying? Like, once the second it's doing something for you that you like, it's entertaining you, it's feeding a, a want that you have for fictional content, you're willing to extend total goodwill and hypothetically assume the best of every reason they have for writing it in ways that like you won't even extend to people talking about their own personal life situations, because why exactly? Like what's up with that dichotomy? And then once you finish resolving that, let's take it a little further. Let's talk about how often various types of content is defended with, oh, it's just a coping mechanism. Some people write this type of content to cope, that sort of thing. While, again, at the exact same time, anyone who criticizes this sort of content is derided as trying to censor people, or being closed-minded, or anti-intellectual, or being anti-sexuality, or being homophobic and oppressive. We're all obsessed with purity culture. We're all self-righteous. We're all, concern trolling or virtue signaling. It's never just like, no, we're maybe someone who is personally impacted by these topics, and we're uncomfortable with the way people feed an atmosphere of like entitlement and want around these topics, like give us more rape fic that emphasizes the hurt rather than the comfort. Give us more sexual abuse that's meant to sexually gratify the reader. All of this gets defended as being about someone's coping mechanism, hypothetically, while there's no hypothetical goodwill extended to anyone who is personally and negatively impacted by this type of content and the sheer volume of it, because we're obviously just haters who are who are just trying to oppress you or ruin your good time or whatever. But me and because of this like sheer willful like fixation on just presuming the best of people's intentions, nobody ever actually gets around to analyzing the actual content of what it means for something to be like a coping mechanism or whatever. Yeah. Like, people might pay lip service to like, oh, we know that sometimes coping mechanisms aren't always healthy or whatever, but like you can't go around and ask someone individually like, are they a survivor? What are their trauma credentials, and like to like expose their wounds in order to defend like their reasons for writing something. But like, and you know what, like the thing is, like I would actually agree with you there. Like I don't think people should do that, but I don't think people have to do that in order to just analyze the end results in ways that like is practically forbidden in various fandom circles. Like, for instance, if I talk about a coping mechanism being like going to therapy versus an unhealthy coping mechanism being going out and picking fights with random strangers, because punching people and beating people up makes me feel powerful in a way that being abused like didn't. Like, I don't think that I would have to trot out my trauma credentials in order for people to like draw their own conclusions as to whether or not that coping mechanism in and of itself is not good and harmful to other people as well as myself. So what I want to ask is, why are people so quick to get everyone on board with being like, oh, there should be no criticism of any rape content whatsoever because you don't know if somebody's using it to cope, when actually some of us are literally just asking people to analyze, okay, what is fan art of an adult raping a 12-year-old who's related to them and is clearly terrified while the adult looks gleeful or something like that. Like, how exactly is that a coping mechanism for anyone? Like, I'm not asking anyone to like bear their trauma credentials or be like, oh, this happened to me and thus I'm justified. I'm just asking you to straight up tell me, explain it to me like I'm 5. How is something that garners reader comments about how naughty they feel and tee hee, this is so hot, and they feel so dirty for liking it, but they do, like, how is that someone's coping mechanism versus exploitative of various other people's trauma? Like, how is someone healing from that? How is someone being made better by it? Because I don't think anyone actually believes that of certain types of content, but they'll still throw that up as a shield. Oh, coping mechanism, in order to act as a smokescreen for anything that draws criticism from various corners of fandom. Like, and that's what I mean about the hypothetical goodwill thing. Like, you want us to believe that literally every single person out there making this sort of content, everyone is always doing it just from a coping mechanism standpoint, and thus they're justified. Nobody anywhere in any fandom is ever doing it because they just like it. They find it hot. They have predatory impulses of their own that they're trying to feed, or any number of reasons. Like, there's so many possible explanations for why people make this type of content, but you all hide behind just the one shield of some survivors use dark content to cope. And the thing is, you use this defense literally to the faces of other survivors like myself, who are the ones primarily criticizing a lot of this content. And you use hypotheticals in the absolute reverse to discredit and discount our feelings and opinions on everything by saying, like, oh, this is all just about purity culture, when no, it's fucking not. It's not purity culture for me to object when people frame, the incest that kind of destroyed my life before my life ever got started as something that's hot and sexy and romantic between, two family members. Like, that's not purity culture. That's fucking personal. Like, but you'll frame it as purity culture to act like I have no basis for having any objection to the sheer proliferation of this kind of content, while at the exact same time telling me, a survivor, that hypothetically anyone whose content I'm upset with could theoretically be a survivor, and just using this as a coping mechanism. Like, you willfully look away from my freely offered, status as a survivor, from my being perfectly willing to be upfront and say, like, hey, this is why I object to this content, because it's personal, and it's personally, like, affecting, various things about my fandom interactions. Like, you will willfully look away from that and reduce my motivations to the most basic, assumptions about purity culture, or internalize homophobia, or whatever the fuck, in order to, like, or anti-sexuality, again, used to be a sex worker. Like, I'm not anti-sexuality. I'm not, like, morally opposed to sex. It's just I don't equate rape and incest with sex. But anyway, sorry, I warned you about getting heated. But like, you see what I'm saying? Like, you'll discredit me with any, or anyone else like me, with any self-conjured logic you can come up with for like why I might be opposed to like this sort of content for reasons other than what I've directly stated, while at the same time you use some survivors use content to cope as a smokescreen for literally everybody who's like making the content that gets criticized. Like, does that not strike you as extremely fucked up that you are exploiting survivors en masse as a shield against survivors criticizing people who almost certainly include at least some number of people who are literally just getting off on, the sexualization of our traumas and abuse and that sort of thing? Like, how does that not ring alarm bells for you? How do you justify that, like, to yourselves? Like, I mean, and then expanding on that, we end up in discourses about how like fiction isn't reality and there's a difference, and if you don't get that, well, I just can't help you. And it's like, wow, okay, so again, you want to presume the worst of survivors and critics of this type of content. Like, we're too stupid to get, that like not everyone who writes this sort of thing is going out and replicating it in real time. Like we don't get that. But at the same time, you shut down and ignore anything we have to say about the fact that, okay, if fiction isn't reality, if the two are so divorced from each other, if nothing you guys write has any effect on our reality whatsoever, then how do you explain the fact that like half the rape content out there is tagged with things like extremely dubious consent when there's absolutely no consent to be found because, the premise of the fic is something like blackmail or some other form of coercion? How do you explain the fact that, like, the reality is a lot of people in fandom seem, by all displays of evidence, to either be outright lying about what consent is or isn't, or else completely unaware of the full extents and ramifications and definitions of consent? Like, how do you so blithely trot out like the line that like, oh well, fiction isn't reality, and you're just like not sophisticated enough to get that, when you're still tagging things like pseudo incest, when survivors like me have made posts after post after post being like, hey, that's like a literal fucking insult to incest survivors, because hey, guess how many incest survivors like were victimized by like a step parent or a step sibling? And your argument is that you could go up to any of them and say, oh, sweetie, you're not actually an incest survivor. Incest isn't bad, see, because what you are is a pseudo incest survivor. You survived pseudo incest because, see, not actually your family. Never mind that, like, even when predatory step parent or step sibling is your victimizer instead of, a biological one, this can still completely result in the total destruction or ripping apart of your family unit, which is also, coincidentally, one of the ramifications of incest. It's not just about inbreeding or whatever, and never was. But, like, see, most people don't even know that when they trot out a defense about how, like, oh, incest never hurt anybody. Because you're assuming the best of everyone who writes the stuff that you want to read, while assuming the worst of everyone who criticizes it, which in this situation happens to include actual incest survivors who have tried to tell you on multiple occasions, like, how the realities of the things you're writing about are so much more intricate and far extending than you think they are, as evidenced by your literal own writing. But again, like, these posts never go anywhere. They never get signal boosted. They never get passed around fandom for any of the readers or writers of a lot of this content to consider, because, again, notice how, like, any random person for any reason can go online and immediately gain pretty sizable following by writing um, hypersexualized rape fic and incest fic that's meant to titillate and, arouse people. And, this will get spread like wildfire. But at the same time, survivors asking you to signal boost actual posts based on their life experiences about the realities of things like abuse and sexual abuse and rape and assault, like, these flop and go absolutely nowhere because you would rather signal boost and proliferate the fantasized eroticism of, all of this type of stuff than signal boost people who have already fucking survived this type of stuff in real life and are trying to spread awareness, trying to add nuance to the conversations, trying to like expand your understanding of various topics. And notice how it's never, some survivors write posts to educate others to cope. It's no, we're just hating on your sexual expression of yourself and your perfectly fine fantasies with absolutely no justification whatsoever. Again, there's that really fun dichotomy that I keep circling back to, where it's like, we like it, so it's good, and everyone who says otherwise is Satan. You know? And then, like, see, there's so many more layers to this. We can keep going. We can keep digging. How about the way people talk about tagging? Like, oh, well, if you just bind the tags, you wouldn't have a problem. Like, okay, discounting the fact that, like, even if I never read a single one of these fics in my life, like, I can still have a problem with people, like, within, fandom circles not that divorced from me, like, literally getting off to the very same things like my rapist got off to. Like, I can still find that uncomfortable without reading the actual fics myself. But even let's leave that aside for now. Let's just talk about how okay, so as long as I just mind the tags and don't go anywhere near something that's appropriately tagged, like, I won't have a problem, right? So also, let's not examine the inherent victim blaming aspect of this. It's like, oh, well, see, if you get upset, you did it to yourself. Like, no. But let's ignore all that for a second. Let's focus just in on again, the goodwill assumption that everyone who writes this type of content is tagging appropriately. Even though we already covered that, some people literally don't even seem to realize what the actual full essence of things like consent even are, and thus can't appropriately tag their fics, even if they wanted to. Let's put that aside. Let's look past the fact that, like, this assumes that, like, there are no people out there whatsoever who actually, like, enjoy or get off to, like, causing distress in trauma survivors by deliberately, excluding tags or trying to trigger people. Like, I mean, just in my own fandom, like, I've, I project a lot onto my personal favorite character, Dick Grayson, who is a rape survivor. In response to, like, me venting about things like how often this character gets raped in a fandom, in fics in a fandom that, claims to, like, be so mad at DC for not examining, like, his canon rapes to begin with. I literally had people that very same night posting fics that were tagged things like Dick Grayson can, will, and must be raped. And, like, I had people sending links to this sort of thing into my inbox. And, like, I'm not shy about being a survivor or, like, it, being the basis for a lot of my opinions on various things. Like, people deliberately tried to trigger me. Like, it's fun for some people. Like, and again, you want us all to just, like, be content with having multiple people assume the worst about our motivations for criticizing and objecting to various types of fic, but you won't say anything at all about the literal on display evidence of people who aren't interested, who aren't ever going to tag their fics appropriately because they're not interested in tagging fics or sparing someone, like, from being triggered or whatever. They want that. There are some people who are just straight up fucking assholes, and this doesn't fit your narrative of being completely justified in everything you write and receiving it completely positively no matter what. So you just ignore it completely. You just erase it from the narrative and talk around it and talk over survivors when we bring that sort of thing up. Like, show me where the people who write dark fic, even just to cope, show me where fans of that, show me where you're commenting on friends' fics or just adding them directly or DMing them to be like, hey, I noticed you didn't tag your fics, like, or tag this latest fic, and it, might be distressing to some people who went in expecting catharsis or something, because that's the thing people turn to fanfic for, and instead found, an older brother raping his little brother with no warning. Tell me how often that happens. If these tags are this all-encompassing, like, defense from criticism, and nobody has any basis for having any problem so long as we just mine the tags properly. Tell me how often you're being proactive about making sure that, like, survivors who don't turn to this to cope are being taken care of and looked out for, and then, like, I want to go back to the part where I was talking about how there's, an essence of victim blaming in being like, well, you're kind of doing it to yourself if you don't, block these tags or avoid these tags. First off, stop infantilizing survivors. Stop acting like you're performing us this big service by tagging fics when you bother to do it at all. Like, like, the entire nature of this argument is that we're, like, inherently fragile, and, like, being triggered means we're going to, like fall into a million pieces if not for, like, the goodwill of taggers who, like, are, so conscientious about being like, take care of yourself in the author's notes, like, please read the tags carefully. Like, there's something so condescending about that, because it's like, triggering is not a one-size-fits-all thing, first of all, and secondly, no survivor I've ever met needs to be told to look out for their mental health or well-being. Most of us have a lot of experience with performative lip service, and the fact that, like, people aren't always as invested in, looking out for survivors and believing us and helping us, erect and maintain boundaries as, like, people like to pretend they are. And so we don't need to be told how trigger warnings work. We don't need to be told to be careful about what we do or don't read. We need to be listened to when we say, hey, I object to this, and this is why. Because, like, so many of my own criticisms of various fics and content come about by people looking at me, like, literally just being angry in a post. And they point to my anger as invalidating any point I might have to make by, like, casting it as some kind of, like, pitying, like, oh, see, he didn't mind the tags, he's just triggered, and so it's sad, and we're not mad at him, we feel bad for him, but, if he had just looked out for his, mental and emotional well-being by staying away from that content like he should have, then he wouldn't be this upset. And it's like, no, maybe I would be, and chances are I did stay away from that content, and I didn't actually trigger myself. Chances are I'm just pissed off, at the performative, like, two-faced nature of how the very same people who are like, take care of yourself, hydrate, like stay stay well, friend, are, some of the first people to turn around and be like, okay, but how dare you suggest there's something negative about me consuming the very same content which replicates your trauma and referring to it exclusively in glowing terms and like calling it hot and like being like, oh my god, when it's the character I like getting raped, that's actually something that can be so sexy and intimate. Like, no. Like that's not how that works. None of this is how any of that works. And like, but you infantilize survivors. You assume the worst of us coming across sticks that upset us in any way, even if it doesn't outright trigger us, and you assume the worst of our ability and even attempt to safeguard our own mental and emotional well-being, while again assuming the absolute best of everybody who writes this type of content and being like, oh, they would never, mistag or misrepresent their work, or they would never like put it somewhere where it might trigger someone accidentally, or like, you see what I mean? Again, they get the benefit of goodwill. We get the benefit of not knowing what the fuck we're doing. Like, we just bumble along through society and just bump into reenactments of our trauma all willy-nilly with like no attempt to like navigate around them whatsoever. Like, no, that's not a thing. And it's just, honestly, there's so much fucking more I could say about these topics. Like, there's so much more I could expand on this, but I'm already at over half an hour long with this video, and it's too much, because this is all stuff that I've tried to talk about multiple times in multiple ways with multiple tones over and over and over again, and all these conversations or attempts at conversations, attempts at like expanding fandom awareness of there being more than one side to an argument when it comes to this stuff, like it all goes nowhere, because so many people just flat out don't want to hear it, don't want to consider it whatsoever, because they don't want even to risk it ruining their enjoyment of something that they're currently entertained by. And that priority, that's what I'm most pissed off about. That's what I'm actually angry about. Not mistag fix, not donations, not any of the other stuff that it so often is made about. I'm pissed off at how often it's made about literally everything but the actual topics at hand, the actual topics that me and others like me try to raise, to get people to hone in on, to get people to actually talk about, without making it about censorship when nobody's censoring you by asking you to think critically about something, or make it about, oh, there's no difference between me and like the religious right, like I wasn't fucking gay bashed by people who are exactly what you're describing. Like, the sheer what the fuck surrounding all of this is what pisses me off in and of itself. It's not any one thing, it's all of these things. And it's the fact that like we all go around and around and around and around in circles, and every time I come back to like the same thing that I've tried to say 100 times before, you know what the most common reaction I get is? People rolling their eyes and going, ugh, not Ao3 discourse again. Because that's what it comes down to some of you. That's all it is to some of you. And you try to make it about purity culture for us, and fundamentalism, and control issues, and like, being anti-sexuality and all of this bullshit, because you don't want to talk one-to-one with us about the fact that like we might not be pulling stuff out of our ass when we say like, no, actually I'm negatively impacted on a very personal level by the way everyone personally assumes the worst of me and my person anytime I try to like raise a criticism of content overall without trying to zero in on a specific individual, because most of you are complete fucking strangers to me and I don't care who you are as a person. It's irrelevant to me. It doesn't impact my life one way or another. Your content does. What you're writing does. The way you defend it does. Your reasons for any of that don't change any of that for me. They're irrelevant. I do not care. Like, but you all take it as like a personal attack whenever I say anything remotely critical of something that you associate with yourself. And like, and so it all comes back to this willful determination to like cast me or anyone making the same kinds of arguments as me as like just inherently not knowing what the fuck we're talking about. Because see, you're a good person and thus you only do good things, and thus anything you do is obviously good. Otherwise, how could you be a good person? Like, make it make sense. You see? And that's what pisses me off the most. Like, most of you aren't even listening to any of this because, not because you're right, but because you refuse to even entertain the possibility that you might be wrong. And it's not like I didn't, I'm in my mid-30s. It's not like I didn't, grow up in the same kind of fandom spaces that most fandom elders on the opposite side of this topic from me did. It's not like I didn't hear the same arguments, about stuff being a coping mechanism, and like, uh, you know, I should just assume the goodwill of everyone. Like, it's not like I didn't get exposed to those exact same arguments, for 15 plus years and counting. Like, I didn't just, like, open my eyes one day and go, like, oh, all that's bullshit. Like, I had to actively unlearn that shit after it was forced down my throat by fandom after fandom that all had a vested stake in maintaining the illusion that there's absolutely nothing problematic about any of this content whatsoever. Like, I'm angry because fandoms literally lied to me, a survivor from before I even entered fandoms. Like, I've been a survivor my whole life. Like, so, like, I was already traumatized before I ever even entered a fandom in the first place. And from day one, the focus of every single fandom I've been in, every single one, has been encouraging me, a survivor, to shut up about anything critical I might have to say about any particular handling of any topics related to my trauma. Because, and get this, some survivors use this content to cope. Okay? So what about me? Where's my defense? Where's my catch-all? If it's always about the survivors, if it's not about the entitlement, the gratification, the specific thing everyone else gets from these kinds of content, aside from survivors just using it to cope, then why is it only the survivors who use this sort of thing to cope who get to have their feelings and opinions considered in all of this? Doesn't it strike you that maybe there's an element of something self-serving going on in all of this? That maybe it's not actually about survivors and never has been? And like, anyway, like I said, I'm at like 45 minutes already. This is a lot longer than I was intending to make this to begin with, but there's so much to talk about. There's so much more still to talk about. I barely even cracked the surface of the hypocrisy, and yet nothing I've said today is something that I haven't said a dozen, 100, more than 100 times before in a dozen different fandoms. And if it's the first time some of you have heard literally any of these perspectives whatsoever, what does that say to you about fandom's actual priorities? If you could go into literally any fandom and find any random user who's written a fic about validating the viewpoint of a rapist while raping someone and saying and getting all kinds of kudos and comments and requests for sequels from that. What does it say when you can find that about just about any character in any fandom from any user? But show me off the top of your head where you've seen even one of the things, one of the points I've touched on, raised by another survivor in fandom, and that actually got signal boosted and passed around. Show me where you're listening to the viewpoints of literally anyone who is saying, like, hey, based on lived experiences, here's what we think about the stuff that you claim to care about because you care about survivors coping. Show me where that's how any conversation about these topics has been received in a fandom, instead of me or others like me being accused of just milking any conversation about our specific experiences or traumas. Meanwhile, in every fandom everywhere, writers continue to milk every aspect of my trauma and everyone else's trauma as a form of kink, while shouting down incest survivors and abuse survivors and rape survivors who just want you to, like, take 5 minutes and think about any of these things as something other than your kink, like our experiences, our trauma, our tragedies, not, your personal porn channel. Like, anyway, like I said at the beginning, I'm not pretending not to be personally invested in this, and whatever you think about anything I've said here, please know, like, this isn't going to, like, magically end in my favor somehow. Like, this isn't going to get me scads of donations or new followers, because I can tell you from 15 plus years of posting about this exact stuff over and over and over again, without fail, I always lose followers. I always get hate. It's counterproductive, is what I'm saying, for me to make these kinds of posts if what I'm actually after is, like, internet clout or follower counts or donations. Like, the thing that would actually get me those things is if I never talked about this whatsoever, ever again, and just posted, fun thicklets of, fandom fave characters, i.e. the kind of posts I make that regularly get me notes in the thousands. Like, I know how to make those posts. I can keep making those posts. I can keep getting new followers and getting clout if that's what I was actually after, and this was all just, a big smokescreen for, like, me wanting to, like, mold impressionable young minds to, like, follow me and enhance my standing or whatever. It's not. That's not what's going to happen here. Instead, what's going to happen, and just check this off in your head if any of these sound familiar, more familiar than literally everything I've had to say so far. Tell me if any of these reactions that I'm much more likely to get, like I've gotten them so many times before, tell me if these sound more familiar to you. People coming onto my posts in my inbox to tell me I'm purity culture obsessed. I'm milking my trauma for sympathy. I'm hurting survivors. That's one of my personal favorites. I'm an abusive, scum-sucking survivor shamer, I think was how the last anon I got of that nature put it. just love that scum sucking. But yeah, tell me how I'm hurting survivors, or how I'm too stupid to get that fiction isn't reality, how I'm self harming by ignoring tags and triggering myself needlessly, how I'm irrational and biased on the subject and can't be trusted to have like an objective viewpoint, as sad as that is, and as pitiable as that is. You know, like people aren't mad at me, they're sad for me, but it's obviously true. I'm just not capable of being objective on these subjects. I'm like, look at my anger, it's so irrational. Um, Tell me that I'm censoring people via this video. Tell me how I'm oppressing women and the LGBTQ community, how I'm anti-sexuality, and I'm um, making it impossible for people to express themselves. Um, Tell me how I'm the same as religious fundamentalist bigots who are the same nature as those who literally gay bashed me and gave me this lovely half a jaw. Tell me how I'm bullying people and just trying to like inflict my will upon others to feel empowered personally. Tell me that I'm virtue signaling, or I'm concern trolling, or I'm just trying to pull some think of the children bullshit instead of literally what I said from the very start of the beginning of this video, which is that this is all actually deeply personal for me, and I'm not trying to speak for anyone but myself and how I feel about all of this. But go on, go ahead. Tell me all of that in the comments and in the anons, and don't think anything of the fact that like that was like literally 15 different things that regularly get trotted out like clockwork in response to any of these criticisms I've raised, versus people considering, even for a second, just the one possibility that maybe, just maybe, this whole some survivors use dark fic to cope thing being trotted out by anyone, regardless of whether they, in their own personal awareness, know that they're a survivor or not, might actually just be this kind of self-serving bullshit about content that you personally like, and maybe I'm just have a point there and I'm angry about that point. Maybe that's the actual reason for all of this, instead of all those 15 other things that it's definitely probably um, really because of instead. But anyway, that's all I have time for today. I have to go try to not exist, or pop migraine medication, or do something fun for myself. But you know, if you were at all moved by this, or it gave you a new perspective, or you thought like, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to judge people for like criticizing Ao3 and like want to throw like $5 my way, like, you know, follow the links and toss a coin to your bitcher, I guess. That would be me. Until next time, I'm Kaylin, and I'm sorry for oppressing you with my opinions.